everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Welcome to the Music Producers Alliance live stream mastering special for, excuse me, Andy Blomfelt, or Andy James. Man, you were killing it with that track last time. So this is a follow-up to last week's session with Andy on No Fear No More. It's a Madeon remix. I love what he was doing with the track. And so after going through that first pass, basically I was giving him 2 free masters. There was 2 different approaches that I took. And in both of those, we kind of just went back and forth to A-B between, you know, the different styles of mastering chains that you could do. One's focused on my signature chain, which is basically a pitch and catch multi-band compression method. There's a lot of issues with phase and stuff that I'm very critical of to listen for that style of character that I want to get. And then the other one is just a straight multi-band, or excuse me, straight broadband compression and limiting approach. Very generic, but there's some subtle differences that I was trying to point out last time that have to do with listening for things like transients, overall tonal balance, and overall character of the master. And so today, after reaching out to him, you know, we kind of want to go through and revise some things to optimize the mix for the favorite chain. And so today he sent me back a revised mix, and we're going to go through and just kind of touch up the mastering chain, or both of them even, so we can hear what both sound like and get an idea of what the final result is when you have addressed those things. So without further ado, let me just dive in really quick here. Let me share my screen. And I already have the file. I believe he sent it to me. Yes, I did send it. So I have my session open from last time. And if you guys are watching me live right now, definitely reach out to me through the Facebook chat or, you know, the live stream chat. Leave me a comment, and yeah, let me know if you have any questions, because that's what I'm here for. So for the next, you know, an hour session, basically, I'm going to go through this whole process and kind of tweak my mastering chain to work on the optimized mix. But if you guys have questions along the way about what I'm doing, how the mix sounds compared to that, you know, how am I getting things to drive a certain way, feel free to hit me up in the comments, and I'll do my best to try to, you know, look at them occasionally and answer your guys' questions as we go. So I believe I did download it. Yeah, I did. And of course I have a crazy saving scheme. There we are. So I already have my template set up as opposed from last time. I kind of walked you guys through my template. I guess I can show it to you again. There we go. So this is the latest version. I'm just going to drag that into a new track. So it's already labeled Mix 2. So now I can just toggle those, and like last time, now they automatically mute the first track here. And then now I am viewing or listening to Mix V2, which is feeding all of these chains. So no longer be listening to this guy here, but I can easily iterate between. I can just listen to the difference between the tracks here by muting toggle, or by toggling the mute there. So if anybody has any questions along the way, again, feel free to reach out to me on the comments, let me know, and I will get back to you. Hi to Kathy and Caleb. Awesome. Yeah, that's my family watching. Great to see you guys on here. Okay, so, and do let me know if you have trouble hearing anything. I'm going to play this from the beginning because I just want to get reacquainted with the track. So I'm going to play this from beginning to end. So the very first thing I noticed is you kind of extended your intro. You had like a little fade in there, or maybe did I clip it off the first? No, I didn't. Okay, so that right away lets me know there are some subtle things I'm gonna have to do with changes to my markers and automation to make sure that everything lines up. But it looks like that was the only change throughout the song. Let's just hear everything without any processing. So if I just turn this effects bypass all audio effects, now we're just going to listen to the straight mix, and then it'll give me a better idea. Yeah, so it looks like everything was just moved over a bar or a measure. I love that breakdown. Oh, dude, so beautiful. That was awesome. I can hear just very, very subtle differences. So what I'm going to do is let's just jump into, I'm going to try to line this guy up. So the earlier mix. So we're on the starting, we're keeping it roughly in time. So I'm going to just kind of flip between both of those mix versions so we can kind of hear the difference between the two. And I'm feeling that the subtle differences are probably going to be between the drops and maybe a part of like the verse there. And let's just take a listen. So what I just did right there is I actually lowered the volume because if you guys noticed on the Mix V1, I actually lowered the output volume for that track, and that was basically helping me gain stage going into all of these processors on these, basically on the mastering chains themselves. That helps me gain stage, so I'm not feeding them too hot of a signal to start with. So I felt like that was a healthy mix. So I'm just going to play that part really quick. So one thing that sticks out to me is you definitely tamed the bottom end a lot more. That tightened it up a ton. And because the mix already sounds a whole lot more spacious and roomy, that you notice that the rest of the mix just sounds much more present in this new version here. And so now let me run that part through the processing chain. So I'm going to turn the effects back on here. And let's listen through our very first chain. Remember, this is my pitch and catch method. So the only thing I want to do before I hit play is I want to view all my automation just to make sure that if we grab everything across both, there we go. So I'm just going to grab and drag. All those nodes should be highlighted, except for the first ones. I don't need those. And we are going to just extend the starting point. So that jump is like the first thing that happens right there. I'll make sure it's lined up with the actual drop, just like I had in the original version. And so what's happening here is when I did that move, basically, so for anybody who's working in Cakewalk, when you hold down Shift, it constricts your movement to either lateral or vertical. It doesn't allow you to just freely move. So that's how I know my values are staying the same. And then based on my snap settings up here, it should be snapping right to the measure, which should be right on track with that bar. And if we just zoom in, you can see, yes, that's pretty accurate to the start time. Perfect. All right, so I apologize for the loud part there. Be aware that this is probably going to get really loud for you guys now that we're in the master track. So let's listen to that chain from start to finish. All right, so you can already tell that is quite a bit louder than the previous version. So let's just kind of rebalance that. And to do that, I'm just going to go straight to these drops here. No, let me just start with the drop 2. All right. So I can tell there's a little bit of rebalancing work that I got to do because the pressure of the track has changed. The dynamics have changed. The tonal balance has changed because he did go in and fix that bottom end. It was very present. We noticed on the previous mix. And I want to try to retain some of that low end character, but now that I don't have to cut quite as much in the mastering phase, I can start to bring those things back up, and it's going to be a careful game of iterating through my chain to just debump those things back to where they were. So I don't have to cut quite as much as I was, I believe, in Lin MB. I feel like that can probably come back down to like 2.4. This is probably about 2.6 still. I feel like just a little bit of balance there. Oh yeah, and I forgot those are automation moves. So let's go in and adjust. This one I believe is my lows. Yep, gain it 1. It does sound really good though, pumping through there. Let's go back to our first intro drop. Just want to bump that a tad. There's that sub. So you notice how that low end just starts to come away there probably a little too much. So let's bump that back too. So if Keen's at 0 for that, we probably want to start boosting. And yes, answering Mike Hastings' question, this is somebody else's track. I am just doing the final polish on it to make it sound crisp and ready for streaming, you know, listening to it on commercial radio, broadcast, wherever you want to be able to hear it. So that is my job. I'm basically just helping Andy here make this sound as polished as possible. So again, we would go back to that before and after. If I were to just go over here and hit play, this is without what I'm doing. This is what that's basically what I'm doing, is I'm making it sound loud, trying to address tonal balance things. Yeah, so this is already back on track quite a bit. I feel like I just had to go and ease up on all of the low end cut that I was doing there. There's a couple extra steps that I want to kind of go through. One was just managing some of the changes that I was doing to the EQ post multiband compressor, which is done with this SSLG channel. And you could tell right about 60 hertz, I was doing almost a full dB bump. And if I go, I feel like it can bring some back. There we go. Beautiful. So I'm just trying to check some things on the master output. So you notice this plugin here, Ukulele loudness meter. I'm just trying to gauge what things are roughly at loudness wise, and the closer it is to this 0, the more crushed it's going to sound. When we want to try to get a good balance between loud but not too crushed, because we want it to sound good, and that's obviously a taste thing. It's more of a subjective thing. But there are some objective criteria to reaching that, and those are where I pay attention to things that are going on here. So, controlling that balance, I know you tend to hear this vague term, the smiley curve EQ. So if you look back at Vox Linguist Band, let me play just that part again. So this might be a little elusive because I'm playing the verse, and you notice I actually did some automation moves where I was ducking a little bit, like I'm basically reducing a little bit of the lows to kind of give emphasis to the vocals. And I talked about this in the last live stream, but if we go back to the intro drop, watch what happens here. So there's that smiley curve. There's this little dip between 100 and 500 hertz, and then as we start to climb up, there's this peak right around where the vocals are. There's a lot of sibilance up there, so there's a lot of stuff that's like the S's and P's and T's. That's where the between 2 and 7K kind of lives, but it's also still tonal until you reach like 10K. There's a lot of high-end information up there, like hi-hats, cymbals, things like that. I want to try to keep them from being overbearing on the track, because it's already mixed so well. I don't really want to address those levels as we try to push loudness. So what I try to do is round them off a little early. And then I'm introducing subtle things like, the SSL style compressors and things like analog modeled stuff that tends to play with saturation and harmonics in a way that can soften the top end a little bit and make it a little less harsh as we try to push louder. Because one process, if we were to go and look at just the straight Pro L, those things are basically squarification. If you look at what's happened to the signal, like if I were to push a pure square wave through here, the louder you push it and it starts to crush the top and bottom of it because you're trying to push it louder, you end up with a square wave. And what happens with your sub information and things like that, you have to be very careful of, because as you squarify, you tend to accentuate top end. And this is what happens with the pure square waves. There's infinite overtones, and that's where you get this kind of hollow sounding if you're listening to a pure tone, meaning like I'm just playing a sine wave that's, C sharp or C4 or whatever. That pure note still has infinite overtones, but they're all based on that fundamental note, that C4. But when you're talking about complex information like this, that's where you start to notice all the other harmonics are getting boosted up with the fact that you're limiting that, and you're raising your gain state, your gain floor, you're raising up your noise floor. So as you're being critical of loudness, this is what we try to pay attention to. We want a good balance of things, but depending on the type of limiter you're using, it can start to accentuate and make things sound really sharp and transient, like a really clicky sound to your transients there, and sub information will start to get lost because it takes a back seat. You're no longer having that true sine wave, you're having kind of a clipped sine wave, and that starts to become a square wave. That's squarification. So those are things that I'm trying to manage just as I go through my chain. I try to work backward from the limiter, but you'll find that the meat of what I'm doing with this multiband pitch and catch method between this L316 and the LinMB. So this one is a compressor and this one is a limiter. It's two different things that it's doing. I'm trying to be very mindful of those things. And as those happen, the other thing that I'm taking advantage of is the fact that there is some sort of smearing of the transients. If that makes any sense at all, think of those transients, those nice sharp peaks that kind of give you that clicky sound, that tight kick when you want that kick to hit. The very tight, snap to it, the very beginning. That's the transient. That's the sharpest point of it, meaning it's very quick. Those things you're going to hear a lot more in this other chain. So let's auto mute. Let me play this one for you. So I don't know if you guys can tell a difference, especially if you guys are listening on Facebook Live. The live stream might be just throwing out way too much information to really hear it. But to me, there's a very noticeable difference in the kicks, the transient, especially at the very beginning of each measure, because I noticed you've kind of layered kicks to stand out at the beginning of each measure. They just kind of hit extra hard. And that means if I'm driving the limiters that much harder, they're going to sound that much punchier. However, what tends to happen with multiband, so what's happening with this top one, if you guys couldn't see before, is let me show you. So if I pull up at LinMB, it's very faint, but there are these kind of curves between each of these bands, and those are crossover points. Anytime you introduce crossover points, you are introducing phase cancellation. And so what happens between those, even with linear phase, it's trying to adjust the phase timing of the signal, so you end up with smeared transients. Even in linear phase, you can end up with things like pre-ring. So the lower down, you might notice that the sub starts before the transient hits, and those are very minuscule things, but they can affect the quality of the sound in the outcome. So I'm trying to pay very close attention to this, and I've stacked these in a way that allows me to kind of maximize the sound that we're after. It gives this very smooth broadcast style compression, this broadcast style like overall sound to it. But then at the same time, you can't really hear the effects of comb filtering or phase issues. It sounds pretty natural. And then when you compare that to the just straight the broadband compression method, where there is no multiband tools on here. So this is all pretty much just slate stuff. So like the EOSys IEQ or AirEQ, excuse me. And then we go to the VBC Classic, tape compression, wave center for the stereo width control, and then Slate Digital's virtual mix rack. So on here I've got Hollywood tube collection. So this one right here is just kind of adding some saturation. And then I'm doing some parallel, just subtle parallel. So we're barely 32% mixed, in with the dry signal. And this guy is very subtle. Not really trying to drive it for compression, just kind of adding a little bit of character. And then that's boosting up the loudness underneath the original mix. So then the very last in the chain there is adding some shimmer and thickness. So that's top end and bottom end harmonics with the Revival distortion box, which is basically what it is. It's a harmonics tool. And then out of there, we're going into dynamic EQ, just to kind of soften that top end like we did in the other chain. I'm just using a different tool to do it. And the reason this is different from dynamic EQ is different from multiband compression is because of the way that things like phasing is, when you're pre-filtering a signal versus just taking a particular frequency range and basically manipulating it in isolation. There's a difference in the way that those two algorithms work. So this introduces less phasing issues or no phasing issues at all, and from what I can tell. I could be wrong. I've talked to a few engineers, and I've even followed on like Isotope Are You Listening has a great channel on mastering tools and talking about, you know, audio fundamentals. That's a great one to go watch. So if you guys haven't heard of that, go to YouTube, go to Isotope's channel and check out the series called Are You Listening? And that's with Jonathan Weiner. He's a world-renowned mastering engineer as well. So he's another great person to get accurate info from. That's just another source that I would trust. So after that, we are hitting yet another limiting tool. So this one here, I've been using for a long time. You can tell I've actually used, I started with a preset and then I just kind of worked on it from there. But for the most part, there's not a whole lot going under the hood. There's not a lot going on with it that you can, you know, dial in the way that you could like Isotope or Newfangled, for example. Newfangled Elevate is just a crazy tool. You can go in and tweak any little thing under the hood. But this has a lot of potential for being transparent, but also adding character. So I'm using it for my first stage of limiting, and then the final stage of limiting is pretty transparent, but I am trying to kind of emphasize some of those transients even further to kind of regain some of that pump or that drive or that, you know, just you want that punch, right? And that's where I'm trying to get that back with it. Just a little bit, and that drives it that extra mile there. So with all of those, and you know what? I think I left that on from when I was bouncing the streaming version. There we go. Hopefully I didn't lose you guys. So let me do another comparison for you guys really quick. If you guys have any questions, let me just check on you guys really quick. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave you guys hanging. Yeah, if you guys have any questions at all about mastering, mixing, or maybe what I'm showing off here with Andy's track, feel free to comment on the video. All right, so let me go back. We're gonna work and dial in chain A just a little more. I wanna make sure that all of the parts are pretty much tightened up and ready to rock. Andy, again, feel free to reach out to me, just private message me. Let me know if you have any questions about the quality that we're headed in and the final direction for, like, you know, how loud do you want it? I feel like I'm pretty much in the ballpark of where you want it, but it would definitely help to get your input. And that's part of the process. I am here for you. So I don't want to just make something that sounds great for me. I want to make something that sounds great for everybody.
Take
right, so if you guys couldn't tell what I was doing there, I was basically jumping back and forth, just trying to dial in, fine tune the last bit of the chain there. I'm just trying to optimize what these chains were doing between like the input gain on the elevate, because I noticed it was a hotter signal, so I dropped it down, but because of the way that he had changed the mix, the gain structure changed entirely. So I'm just trying to massage certain things in. I feel like the gain structure that was going into LinMB was fine. I just had to readjust that relationship for the low end with my automation settings there. So as you saw me earlier, if you guys didn't catch what was happening, I was just kind of gently nudging these back into place. So now what I'll probably do is I will just go in and grab those same settings and paste them down here. So that way make sure I have everything the same. Actually, it wouldn't be the same because I wasn't using LinMB. Stereo width didn't change. These I do want to kind of go in and readdress. This one's stereo width. This is also nice that it lets you name these tracks, so it's good to know what's going on. Band type, oh yeah. Shelf switch. That's always good to know. Bell versus shelf. And then this one was actually the band 1 gain. There we go. So that's just controlling this guy here. So as you see, as I jump around, it's doing different things. So let's just check that. Alright, so I just want to fine tune this one a little bit. However, I do want to address Andy because he just reached out to me. I think it's really sounding great. I definitely hear the difference in the low end, which is good to hear. That's good, even on streaming through Facebook Live. I paid a lot of attention to stereo width in the mixing process, using a lot of references to really dial in what should and shouldn't be wide. I noticed you're not doing much width control besides the wave's central automation in the master. Is this something you normally address more in other masters? Yes and no. It comes down to each individual track, and you'll notice that's why I'm using Voxango Span. So let me just kind of dive in onto that really quick, and let me show you two spots here. So I'm going to show you the chorus. And then I'm going to jump to this another part here. So there's two spots there because if you notice on my stereo width, I've actually boosted during the drop and during the rest the width, meaning we're actually pushing the sides up louder than the center channel is. And I kind of wanted to just take what you had already done mix-wise and enhance so that there are times when the track needs to have that energy right in the center. Whenever that kick is going and the sub is the focus of the track, I'm trying to keep a balance for all the stuff that you were playing with in the stereo width and not destroy it and not really like overtake and say, hey, this is the center driver. But I wanted to just make that journey feel a little bit more emphasized between those different sections of the song. I get the room to play with that because you did such a great job on the mix. I can just enhance and accentuate those moves that you've already done. Now, a lot of times what will happen is I might use this tool more correctively, which means it might end up earlier in my chain. Or I might have things before our EQ, the Renaissance EQ. So I might go in and use something like, Pro Q and drop it at the very beginning of the track and just throw in a, heaven forbid it should be a low cut, but let's say worst case scenario is a low cut. And then I go and I say, I want to put this in side mode. So now I'm just rolling off everything from the sides below, let's say 150 hertz. And so now in fact, let's make it really apparent. I'm just going to draw and just say brick wall it, right below 150 hertz. Jump it to 200 there, and you're just going to see this orange graph fall right off below 200. So I don't know if anybody can hear that through Facebook compression, but as I let this go, you notice it came back below about 100 hertz. There's a little bump there, and it kind of tapers off about 70 hertz. That very, very minuscule amount. But the fact that I turned this off, I bypassed that, it felt like the bass, the sub, was warmer, meaning there is more information going on in the stereo image that creates the illusion of warmth because it's actually phasing information. There's unique information about the sub frequencies on the left and the right. Those are things that we try to be very critical of, especially if you are working to make this, live ready. If you want to go tour and play at a venue or like a club or something like that, most of those places, especially in the US, are going to sum to mono. And when they do that, that phasing information might sound like you just lost a whole lot of information, or suddenly what might happen even if you've taken the critical time to pay attention to all the other elements in the mix and make it mono compatible, right? You only drive your synths, 50% wide as opposed to 100% wide. But if you're not careful with the fundamental relationship down at the bottom where the kick is, and you have that sub and it's got a little bit of width to it, and all of a sudden it cancels out, that sub is going to just fluctuate in level a lot. It might be noticeable. The same might happen with your kick as that, let's say you've got an 808 style kick with a nice sustain to it. Well, guess what? As the sub and the kick compete with each other and you get sum to mono, they start canceling each other out. So you can have ding sound more like ding, like it. Phasing can create modulation, and that's what you don't want to happen. So those are the things that I try to pay attention to, and it really just comes down to the song. I feel like your track didn't need that at all. I felt like you had a good balance of stereo width, so we didn't need things like this in place to correct for all that. And another cool trick that I look for, and because it's hard to tell in headphones, even in nice speaker systems, if I were in a completely, a sterile acoustic environment for mastering, and they're not never truly sterile. They do want, dead front live in the back a little bit. I've had the pleasure of working, going through some amazing mastering facilities like Michael Romanowski's over at Coast Mastering in Berkeley. Just a beautiful studio setup, 14-foot ceilings. He's got a nice playback system that just had impeccable stereo imaging and things like that. I get to hear some of my tracks that I've mastered in that room. And I can tell you, even in that room, there's some issues. There's imperfections with it, and you just have to be aware with it. And that's where tools like this come into play, being able to correlate what you're hearing with what you're seeing so that if there is something in the signal and you're not hearing it, you know why you're hearing it, and you know that it exists. It's so helpful to have visual aids. Let me just pause that for a second. And as you're looking at this graph fall, this red line, this red part of the graph is all the sides information. The mono information or center information is green. As long as that red doesn't peak out above the green, at least with the color scheme that I have set up for it, you should be safe. That doesn't mean you're in the clear 100%, but that means that at no time is there sides information that is canceling out center information. And that's the critical job that we're kind of just paying attention to. I want to rein that in, and sometimes I can get really surgical with dynamic EQs and just focus on sides and try to tame that spot if there's a really nasty peak for some reason in one band, for example. But most of the time, I would address it as it comes up. So hopefully that answers your question there. That's a great question to ask, because things like this are things that probably get looked over in the mix. Just because, mix should be about, the presentation of how things sound. It shouldn't be about, these minute changes. I'm looking at mastering as more of like the container, and mixing is kind of like, hey, here's our presentation. We have this whole canvas to paint, right? But you're not really concerned so much about the edges, the framing, and things like that. And the mastering engineer is going to be like the framer. After the masterpiece has been painted, right? The framer is going to look at things like, okay, where is the focus of this piece? What's the message trying to convey? And maybe we'll use things like matting, meaning like how much of it are we just going to like focus in and crop in from the edges of the frame, so that way we can kind of see what's happening there. We focus the audience's attention on the part of the artwork that matters most, and you hide all of those imperfections where the artist didn't really get to spend that much time polishing up and making sure that attention to detail was there and considered throughout the entire piece from edge to edge. And then framing, maybe if it's just, the way that we present the character of the song. If you look at film, for example, like certain filmmakers love the use of film for grain, or they like to add grain back in on digital recording just because that's that aesthetic that it gives to them. It's those finishing touches that happen in the mastering stage for film too. And so like us, we pay attention to things like clipping and distortion and subtle uses of that sound great, to be able to frame your mix as best we can, to kind of give the character, everything is kind of leaning into what the story is trying to tell, what the artist is trying to do with that song, and kind of enhance it, or at least hide the blemishes and imperfections. That's usually not the best way to do it. Like, oh, hey, we'll fix it in the mix, we'll fix it in the master. Well, guess what? And it didn't go away, did it? But that's where this is a follow-up session, Andy, because after I finished up last week's live stream, I reached out to him and said, hey, this sounds great, but I feel like I cut a lot of low-end information out of your track. And when I do that, that means your kick and your sub are getting reduced together. And I want to give you more control over how that relationship is affecting it. I said, if you just back off the low end a little bit, probably the sub the most, and then focus on taming your kick, the relationship with that sub, you're going to notice the track opens up a ton. And sure enough, here we are, and we're listening to the track, and it sounds just even better. It sounds incredible, man. I love it. So if anybody else has any questions, let me just double check. Awesome. So that's pretty much what my job is in a nutshell. We're just trying to frame the audio in the best light possible. We pay attention to what all the outlets are. So if you think of it, going back to that artwork analogy, if we're the framers of the artwork, we got to know things like, hey, where is this going to be displayed? What's the lighting like there? What's the venue? And for digital music nowadays, that tends to be streaming platforms. If you want to put this out for CD duplication, that's another outlet to consider too. But we try to make one master to rule them all, so to speak. There are definitely cases where you might have multiple master versions of a track or a song, but it's probably you're also having multiple versions of that song as well to capture on different outlets. You can look to deadmau5 with all of his assorted remixes and various versions of a song as a great example, but it's rare to see that happen in most circumstances unless you're like somebody at the top who is trying to cater to very, very different segments of an audience, or trying to expand your audience reach in a certain way. That's end game stuff. That's not stuff that's like the meat and potatoes of your music business, if you want to call it that. So I think we've dialed in both chains to a fair amount. I want to just double check the final levels on chain B. So we're going to go back here and let's just take one last listen to the drops and make sure everything sounds good, and we'll wrap this up. In the meantime, if you have any questions, just drop me in the comments below. All right, dude, that sounds incredibly loud. That is actually quite pushed, I believe, but...
Sure.
like that's a little too much. Let's just back that off. Just a subtle amount right there. And then I'm probably going to do something with, oops. So I feel like we did lose quite a bit of low end there with that change. And that's the one thing I haven't addressed with this mix yet. Just enough. Of course, where did I put it? There we go. BBC rack, tape machines. Am I missing it? You know what? I think I moved it. Virtual mix. I feel like maybe I lost it somewhere. Oh, you know what? There it is. There we go. I meant to bring it up here. So one thing I want to do is I'm just going to go to EQ. And we have lift, which I might do post compression. It feels a lot better. Just a subtle lift in the bottom. So if you guys weren't paying attention to those peaks, you could definitely see as I'm moving these, and you can hear it too, hopefully, especially when I push that one all the way to 10. That was crazy. All right, so I feel like that's pretty close to done. I just want to make sure our levels aren't too crazy. So I feel like these two, the Present and the Silky and the Big and Punchy, are focusing on two different like frequency bands or ranges. They're kind of just playing around with those set bands, give you a little bit of movement. But other than that, this is a pretty subtle, I mean, it can be pretty drastic too, but I like to use it in subtle ways. So I feel like that's doing just enough for this mix. And this already brought back that low end, just that bump at the top and the bottom there, right where we want it. Let's go ahead and get these bounced and over to Andy. So, there you have it, folks. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you guys have any questions, before I hop off, I just want to make sure I was able to address anybody's questions. If you missed, if I missed your comments for some reason on Facebook, I apologize, or anywhere else you might be, if you're on Twitch. In fact, let me just go double check Twitch with you guys really quick. Yeah, there was quite a few posts, actually. Interesting. Okay, so I know some of my friends out there were probably joining in. I know Israel was wanting to ask me stuff on vocal production techniques. Maybe we'll do that in another live stream. Let's plan that for maybe a week from now. So let me know if you guys want to see that. That would be amazing if I can do some. I'll show you guys my vocal processing techniques. from start to finish, basically how to set up a mic, things like that, walking through my mixing chains, processing live and everything all the way to the very end. But one last thing really quick, this is basically just a free session for you guys to check out, based on the fact that I was offering a free master and Andy happened to win. And this is only through Music Producers Alliance that I am doing this right now. And if you guys are curious what Music Producers Alliance is, let me just hop back here, screen share. And of course I lost it there. There we go. So Music Producers Alliance is a community. It's a growing alliance with all sorts of producers and artists and engineers. And really it's growing from all backgrounds. It started off for just electronic music producers, but now it's everybody involved. In fact, if you want to, this is a great resource for all sorts of stuff. If you want to learn anything audio related or music business related, there is a ton of value with this community. So if you go to, for example, I don't know if it'll let me log in that quick. I am not a robot, people. I promise. Okay. Log in already. So there's a ton of cool stuff for you guys. Obviously, I have an alias. I go by Pollux and Caster, but there's all sorts of programs going on. There's producer roundtables, which are twice weekly. There's Wednesday and Sunday. So if you guys check that out, this is a huge advantage, especially if you're a pro member. You get priority access to these services where we basically all get together every week, and through Zoom, and audio movers, we get to hear everybody's mix in high quality, lossless audio, and we can critique each other's stuff to maximize, just like I've been doing with Andy here. We work back and forth. Here's a follow-up session, and bam, you get the next level. Like, you can reach that commercial quality. It's a lot harder to do when you don't have feedback. And for a lot of us, I know in the past I've done it myself, where practice is great, but if you're practicing in a bubble, you don't go anywhere. Like, if you practice with feedback, that's corrected practice, meaning you can actually start to get progress. And you can know if you're making progress or not, because it's also other people in the world getting to respond to your art. And that's at the end of the day, that's what we all want. We want to touch other people's lives with our art, right? So this is the hugest thing. If you guys go to the roundtable, you can register to attend for a month at a time, upload your mixes, stuff that you're sending to us. We will address it as a group, and it's open to everybody who goes. You don't have to submit something. You can come just to kind of hang out and network with other people. It's a really cool way to just meet other engineers and artists and producers and just kind of get to know one another and learn something great. It's awesome. The other thing we have are studio hangouts. So studio hangouts are kind of like these live streams like this. It's more specialized. They focus on a particular artist who might have incredible insights into one thing that they specialize in, or a number of things that they've been doing. They do breakdowns. For example, Nina Wild had a great one. Unfortunately, I missed. Groove Mechanic. I got to attend Robert Coster's one. This guy is just crazy. He's so good at designing Max for Live devices in Ableton. And chances are, if you have Ableton Suite, or if you have Max for Live, you can grab some of his stuff at incredible discounts, or I think he still has some available for free for the Music Producers Alliance members. But this is huge. Like, all these resources, and when you actually watch his replay, you get to learn about all of those incredible things that he's designed. It's insane. You get to do all that cool stuff. There's so much in his resource pad just by that alone. That's very helpful. So there's a ton to that. There's also the fact that we have mentors like myself, coaches who can get with you one-on-one. And that's where, like, even with this, the free offer of, the mastering for Andy, I still had to reach out one-on-one with him to get him to that next stage where we can really optimize, his mix for this type of mastering, and to kind of help him hone in on what he wants. So this is great. Coaches are going to help you get there in just the same way. Maybe you need help with, your live sound setup, or you need business, management advice, or if you need marketing or like mastering, for example, hey, I can reach out to, Zach Allen, who's a Grammy-winning music producer. This guy is based out of Nashville, and, he's got tons of credits to his name. Excellent dude. Just reach out to these coaches, find somebody who resonates with you, and they look at their area of expertise, reach out to them, let them know you're interested, like, hey, look, we're looking for help with this or that. And mentors are going to help you get there faster. That's the biggest thing. If you think you can do it on your own and then you spend years trying to hone your craft, but you haven't really gotten to where you want, just chances are you've probably just have a blind spot. We can help you with that. Chances are a lot faster than if you were to try to figure that out on your own. So that's it. This community is also available directly through MPA, and we also have a chat feature. There's a lot of cool stuff that he's been adding to it. I think the chat feature might be coming really soon, so it kind of acts like Facebook chat, but it's directly here on the site, so it's a quick way to communicate with other members. And the fact you have access to the member directory is a great networking tool. This is what I've talked about plenty of times before. So if you look at anybody who is on here, I can reach out to them. I don't have to go through their manager. I don't have to go through their P&R channels, PR channels or things like that. It's a great resource. So if I reach out to Groove Mechanic through here, chances are I'm gonna be able to reach out to him and get a hold of him to talk about things like maybe I have an idea for a remix. Now, I'm not saying go out and just blast your stuff and try to network and do everything. Make sure it's a good fit. Like, actually have something of value that you can bring to the table. And there's a ton of people who have talked about different ways to organically reach out and find collab opportunities and things like that if that's your goal. There's a good way to go about it. There's a bad way to go about it. But this is another tool that you can leverage other than trying to, hey, there's, this guy selling quote unquote record label contacts and things like that for $200 or whatever, and you just spam those emails. That's not going to get you very far. Maybe 1% might even read your email, let alone respond to you. So this is just an even better tool than that. So with all that said, if you guys have questions on more mastering stuff, feel free to reach out to me. You can go through the MPA website. But if you go to my site right now, if you're in Cakewalk or if you're in Ableton Live, I would love for you guys to go check out my free channel presets that I have for you guys set up, so that way you guys can see what I'm doing based on these mastering chains that I have in my DAW. So what I've gone and done is in chain A, this is my signature style, mastering chain. I've attempted to recreate these with just stock plugins that come in Ableton Live and Cakewalk, so that you guys can hear that, and I can even hear the difference. And I found that they were pretty darn close. In fact, I don't know why my site's not responding, but if you go to my site, there are basically some great plugins available. Sorry, not plugins, but preset chains for you guys to check out. And yeah, so that's it. I'll leave links in the YouTube post after that. And sorry, I'm kind of losing control here. So I'll leave links to the chat in the comments below for the Ableton Live mastering preset chain, as well as the Cakewalk preset chain that's using the Pro Channel modules. So for any of you guys who have Ableton Live or Cakewalk by BandLab, those are free presets for you guys to utilize. That's just, I'm leaving them as free for now. Just type in 0 and name your price and then hit buy, and it's basically on my shop. And that will get you access to those presets. And then you can drag them in, and that'll give you a good approximation. If you're on my shop, below the actual download link, you'll see a video when I have a walkthrough of each of those chains, showing my process applied with those chains on an actual client's track, and you guys can hear the results that I'm getting with it. You don't have to go and spend hundreds or thousands of dollars on high-end plugins to do what I'm doing here. I've just taken the time to craft stuff that I feel works for me and what I want to help my clients achieve. So I want to save you guys money so you can focus on doing the things that matter most. And these presets are a great starting place for you guys to kind of check out and learn how to, go in and break those chains, get them to work for you. And those are going to be great starting points. So I hope that helped everybody out. Until next time, guys, happy productions.